Arizona mornings come in hard and bright. By 10 a.m., the heat already clung to the asphalt like a second skin. The desert air smelled of dust, gasoline, and sun-baked rubber. Cicadas buzzed somewhere beyond the highway, and a 6-year-old girl was running, barefoot. Gravel tore into the soft skin of her feet. Each step sent a sharp sting up her legs, but she didn't slow down. Blood dotted the ground behind her in small red marks that vanished quickly against the gray road. Her lungs burned. Her throat tasted like metal. Behind her, somewhere behind the Texaco gas station, thud, 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 boots hitting a body, a boy's breath breaking. "Run, Lily!" The voice had come through blood and dust. Her brother. Run! She didn't look back. If she looked back, she might stop. And if she stopped, Ethan would die. So Lily Carter ran. She burst past the gas pumps, her small shoulder slamming against a metal pole that rattled loudly. A pickup truck idled nearby. Inside, a man sat with his window cracked, scrolling on his phone. Lily ran past him. He didn't look up. Maybe he didn't hear. Maybe he didn't want to. A woman stood beside a grocery cart near the convenience store doors, loading plastic bags into her trunk. Lily slowed just enough to grab the woman's sleeve. "Please." The woman looked down. She saw the torn pink dress, the dirt, the blood running down a child's ankle. For a moment their eyes met. Then the woman gently pulled her arm away. "I'm sorry," she murmured, already turning back toward the car. The trunk slammed shut. Lily ran again. Her feet struck hot pavement now. Behind her, another dull impact. A low cry. "Ethan!" The sound twisted inside her chest like a knife. Then she saw the motorcycles. They were parked in a line outside a roadside bar like a row of sleeping animals, chrome, black paint, engines silent under the desert sun. Harleys. 12 of them. The building behind them had a weathered wooden sign. Rusty's. The patio fence was open. Inside sat a dozen men. Big men. Leather vests. Heavy boots. Beards and tattoos. The kind of men mothers usually warned their children about. But Lily remembered something her mother had once said, a long time ago before Travis came into their lives. "If you're ever in real trouble, baby, find the biggest, strongest people you can. Ask them for help. Don't be afraid." Lily wasn't afraid anymore. She had run past fear. Now there was only one thing left. Action. She hit the patio gate so hard it slammed against the wall. Bang. Every conversation stopped. A fork clattered onto a plate. Someone dropped a glass. A woman gasped. The sound of the bar collapsed into sudden silence. Lily stood there, 6 years old. Blonde pigtails half undone. Pink sundress ripped at the shoulder. Bare feet bleeding onto the concrete. Her small chest rose and fell like a trapped bird. And then she screamed. "Please help." Her voice cracked the still air. "They're beating my brother!" "He's just a kid. They're going to kill him. Please." The silence that followed had weight. The kind that settles over a room when something important has just happened. Jake Brennan set his coffee down. He was 42 years old, brown hair going gray at the temples. A long scar ran from his left ear down to the edge of his jaw, a souvenir from a roadside bomb in Kandahar back in 2007. 2 tours in Afghanistan. 3 years afterward inside a VA hospital fighting ghosts that didn't wear uniforms. And 15 years riding with the Hells Angels, where he'd found the closest thing to brotherhood he had left. He was the club's sergeant at arms, the man responsible for problems. And right now a problem had just run through the gate with blood on her feet. Jake looked at the little girl, at the dirt on her cheeks, at the terror in her eyes. Then he asked one quiet question. "Where?" The girl ran to him immediately and grabbed the front of his leather vest with both hands. Her fingers were tiny against the thick material, but they gripped with desperate strength. "Behind the gas station," she said, breath shaking. 3 men. "My brother's on the ground. He can't get up." "Please, mister, he can't get up." Jake stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a speech. He just looked around the table. Brick Morrison was already pushing back his chair. 6'5", nearly 300 pounds, with a blonde beard thick enough to hide half his face. Tommy Vance pulled his phone from his pocket. Hector Ruiz stood next. Then Denny Walsh. Then Cole Parker. One after another. 12 men, rising like a single organism responding to the same signal. No one asked questions. No one hesitated. Jake reached for the gate. He nodded toward the road. "Show me." The girl didn't let go of his vest. She turned and ran, and 12 Hell's Angels followed her across the parking lot. A 6-year-old child leading them into whatever waited behind that gas station. Lily ran as fast as her legs would carry her. Her feet slapped the pavement, wet now, sticky with blood. The morning sun glared off windshields and chrome as she cut across the Rusty's parking lot. Behind her came the thunder of boots. Heavy, fast, determined. Jake Brennan kept pace beside her, long strides measured, controlled. He could have passed her easily, could have sprinted ahead in seconds, but he didn't. This was her charge. She had started it, and she had earned the right to lead. Behind them, the other 11 bikers followed, boots hammering the asphalt in rough rhythm. People at the bar patio had stood frozen when the men left. A truck driver paused halfway through a bite of eggs. A young couple held hands across their table, watching the bikers disappear around the gas station building. An older man near the window later described it simply. It looked like an army mobilizing. 200 yards. That was how far Lily had run on bleeding feet to find someone who would listen. They rounded the corner of the Texaco station. Jake saw the scene instantly. Ethan Carter lay on the ground near the dumpsters behind the building. The boy had curled into himself, arms wrapped over his head in a desperate shield. 3 grown men stood around him. They weren't pushing him. They weren't arguing. They were kicking him. Boots came down hard, one after another, like men trying to break something that refused to break. The biggest of them drew his leg back again. Travis Holden. Tall, broad shoulders, black tank top stretched across muscle. His boots slammed into Ethan's ribs. A sharp, ugly sound escaped the boy's mouth, half breath, half cry. Jake recognized it immediately. It was the sound a body makes when it is reaching its limit. Jake stepped forward. His voice cut across the lot like a rifle shot. "Step away from the kid." All 3 men turned. They saw Jake first. Then the other 11 bikers spreading out behind him. Leather vests. Hell's Angels patches. Faces that promised consequences. For a single moment, something flickered in Travis Holden's eyes. Something close to hesitation. But Travis wasn't a man who processed fear properly. Fear turned into anger inside him. Always had. "Mind your own business," Travis said. "This is family." Jake walked closer, each step slow, measured. "He's 14, Jake replied. "And there are 3 of you. That's not family. That's a felony." Ethan shifted weakly on the ground. A broken breath escaped his lips. "Behind Jake!" Lily cried out. "Ethan, I brought help." "Hold on." That voice hit Ethan like electricity. He forced one swollen eye open. Blood ran from a gash above his eyebrow. His lip was split badly enough that part of it hung loose. But he managed a weak smile when he saw his sister. "I'm okay, Lil," he whispered. He wasn't. Everyone there knew it. Kyle Briggs made the first mistake. He reached behind his back and pulled out a knife. The blade snapped open with a metallic click. 4 inches of steel pointed toward Jake. "Back off, old man," Kyle snarled. "I'll gut you." Brick Morrison moved. For a man who weighed nearly 300 pounds, he moved shockingly fast. 2 long strides. His hand closed around Kyle's wrist. He twisted. Hard. The knife clattered to the asphalt. Kyle screamed as his wrist bent in a direction wrists weren't meant to bend. Brick shoved him down onto the ground with controlled force, pinning him effortlessly. Ray Sutter saw this and bolted. He made it maybe 10 feet. Hector Ruiz stepped into his path. Cole Parker appeared from the other side. Ray tried to pivot. Hector's arm slammed across his chest like a steel bar. Ray crashed to the pavement, the phone flying from his hand and skidding across the gravel. The phone kept recording. Its camera pointed toward the chaos. Now Travis stood alone, 2 of his men down, 12 bikers surrounding him, and Ethan still lying at his feet. A rational man might have backed away, might have surrendered, might have chosen survival. Travis Holden smiled instead. A thin, crooked smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You think this changes anything?" he said. You think you can protect them? I found them once. I'll find them again. She belongs to me. The kids belong to me. Jake closed the final distance between them. 10 feet. Close enough. Far enough. His brothers fanned out silently behind him, blocking every direction Travis could run. The net had already closed. Travis simply hadn't noticed yet. Walk away, Travis warned, voice tightening. Right now, or you're going to have a real problem. Jake's expression didn't change. Brother, he said quietly, I've had real problems. You're not one of them. Step away from the boy. Ethan groaned. A small sound, barely audible, but it was enough. Jake moved. His right fist came forward in one smooth motion. No wasted movement, no warning. Just clean mechanics. Weight shifted. Hips turned. Knuckles met the point of Travis's jaw with a sharp, solid crack. Travis didn't stagger, didn't stumble dramatically. He simply stopped being vertical. His eyes rolled back. His legs folded beneath him, and he dropped onto the asphalt like a sack of sand falling off a truck. Silence returned. The wind whispered across the lot. Somewhere a truck passed on the highway. Lily's small voice broke the quiet. Is the bad man down? Jake looked at Travis lying motionless on the pavement. Then he glanced back at the little girl. He's down, sweetheart. And he's staying down. The ambulance arrived with its siren already fading. Red lights spun across the gas station walls, flashing over chrome motorcycles and dusty pavement. 2 paramedics jumped out before the vehicle fully stopped. They moved with calm efficiency. One knelt beside Ethan. The other opened a trauma kit. Kid, can you hear me? The paramedic asked. Ethan tried to nod. It came out as a slow, painful twitch. Good. Stay with me. Gloved hands moved quickly. They cut away part of his shirt. Purple bruising was already spreading across his ribs. The paramedic inhaled sharply. Possible fractures, she muttered to her partner. A thick pad of gauze pressed against the cut above Ethan's eye. Blood soaked through instantly. Lily hovered nearby, clutching the sleeve of Brick Morrison's vest like it was the only stable thing in the world. Her feet had been wrapped with temporary bandages from the biker's first aid kit, but the dried blood still stained the edges of the white cloth. She refused to move. Is he going to die? She whispered. Brick crouched, so his enormous frame blocked her view of the worst of Ethan's injuries. No, kid, he said gently. Your brother's tough. Jake knelt beside the stretcher as the paramedics prepared to move Ethan. The boy's breathing came in shallow bursts. Short, sharp, wrong. Jake had heard that sound before. Combat medics called it asterisk, asterisk, guarded breathing, asterisk, asterisk. Rib damage. Every inhale felt like a knife. Easy, son, Jake said quietly. Don't try to sit up. Ethan blinked, one swollen eye open. Lily? He asked. She's right here. Jake glanced over his shoulder. The little girl stepped forward instantly. Her small hand slipped into Ethan's. You did it, Ethan whispered. I found the bikers, Lily said proudly, voice trembling. Just like Mama said. The stretcher lifted. Metal wheels rattled across rough pavement. The ambulance doors opened with a hollow clang. Lily climbed in beside Ethan before anyone could stop her. The female paramedic hesitated for half a second. Then she shrugged. Let her stay, she said. She's not leaving him anyway. Jake stepped back as the doors closed. The ambulance pulled away in a wash of flashing lights. For a moment, the lot fell strangely quiet. Then another vehicle arrived. Sheriff Dan Whitmore stepped out of his cruiser. Tall, broad-shouldered. A man who carried the calm authority of someone who had been wearing a badge for 30 years. He took in the scene quickly. 3 suspects on the ground. Hell's Angels standing nearby. Blood on the asphalt. Whitmore looked at Jake. Talk to me. Jake explained everything. The girl running into Rusty's. The beating behind the gas station. Kyle's knife. The single punch that ended it. Whitmore listened without interrupting. When Jake finished, the sheriff walked over to Travis Holden. The man had regained consciousness. His jaw was already swelling, but his eyes still held that same cold, hateful focus. Travis Holden, Whitmore said calmly. We've got 3 active warrants for you. Travis smirked. Whitmore continued. Restraining order violations, Assault charges, and now aggravated assault on a minor. Deputies lifted Travis to his feet and snapped cuffs around his wrists. Kyle Briggs followed, cradling his twisted arm and sobbing. Ray Sutter said nothing at all. He stared at the ground. As the deputies led Travis toward the cruiser, he stopped and turned his head. His gaze locked onto Jake. The smile returned. That wrong, broken smile. "Tell Nina I said hello," Travis said quietly. "Tell her I always find her." Jake didn't respond, but he memorized that smile. Filed it away in the same place he kept the faces of men who had once tried to kill him overseas. Some threats didn't disappear. They simply waited. Whitmore returned a few minutes later after the cruisers pulled away. The sheriff lowered his voice. "Jake, I need you to understand something." "I'm listening." Whitmore rubbed a hand across his jaw. "Travis Holden isn't just some abusive boyfriend." Jake said nothing. Whitmore continued. "We've had him on our radar for a while." "For what?" "Things I can't discuss yet." The sheriff glanced around the lot. "But I'll tell you this much. He has resources. Money that doesn't come from any job. Connections that make my job very difficult." Jake crossed his arms. "So he'll make bail." Whitmore nodded slowly. "Probably within 48 hours. And when he does," the sheriff added quietly, "he'll come looking for Nina Carter and those kids." Jake looked down at the dark stain on the pavement where Ethan had been lying. The shape of the blood had already started drying in the heat. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. Whitmore exhaled. 3 years. Jake lifted his head. 3 years? "Restraining orders, police reports, court filings," Whitmore said. "Every time Nina tried to get away, Travis found her." "And the system?" Whitmore gave a humorless smile. "The system processed paperwork." He kicked a pebble across the asphalt, filed reports, and then released him again. Jake stared at the ground. The blood, the gravel, the faint trail of small footprints leading away from Rusty's patio gate. Little red marks stretching across the lot. 200 yards of courage from a 6-year-old girl. Whitmore followed his gaze. "That kid chose you, you know." Jake frowned. "What do you mean?" "All those people in that parking lot," Whitmore said. "She ran past every one of them." The sheriff paused, and she grabbed the vest of a Hell's Angel. Jake looked up. Whitmore met his eyes. "Don't make her wrong about that." Jake slipped his hands into the pockets of his leather vest. "Where does Nina work?" Whitmore reached into his cruiser and handed him a small card. "Flagstaff Medical Center. Her shift ends at 3. Jake took the card, turned it over in his hand, then nodded once. "I'll find her." Behind them, engines started. The Hells Angels mounted their bikes. Chrome flashed in the sunlight as 12 machines roared to life. Jake walked toward his motorcycle. Rick Morrison glanced over. "What now?" Jake looked once more at the faint line of bloody footprints stretching across the pavement. Then he put on his helmet. "Now," he said quietly, "we finish what she started." Flagstaff Medical Center smelled like antiseptic and overbrewed coffee. Automatic doors slid open as Jake Brennan stepped inside, boots echoing against polished tile. Conversations lowered slightly as people noticed the leather vest, the patches, the scar along his jaw. He ignored the looks. He had walked into worse places wearing worse things. At the reception desk, a nurse looked up from a computer. "Yes? I'm looking for Nina Carter," Jake said. The nurse hesitated. "Are you family?" Jake paused. Her son was upstairs with cracked ribs and stitches in his face. Her daughter had run 200 yards barefoot to save him. "I'm the one who stopped the men beating her boy," Jake said simply. "She needs to know." Something in his voice made the nurse reach for the phone without another question. 4 minutes later, a door marked *** staff. Only *** opened. A woman stepped through. Mid-30s. Blonde hair tied back in a loose knot. Blue scrubs. Dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many night shifts and too little sleep. But the moment she saw Jake's vest, her exhaustion changed to something sharper. Fear. "Who are you?" she asked. "What happened? Is it the kids?" Jake raised his hand slightly. "They're alive." The words landed like air rushing into a vacuum. Her shoulders sagged. Then, she grabbed the edge of the counter. "But Ethan's hurt," Jake continued. "He's in the ER." Nina Carter went very still. "How bad?" He was beaten behind the Texaco station on Route 66, Jake said. 3 men. Her eyes closed. Travis. It wasn't a question. Jake nodded once. Travis Holden, 2 others with him. For a moment, Nina didn't move. Then her knees buckled. Jake caught her arm before she could hit the floor. She didn't pull away. Her hands clutched his forearm as if it were the only solid thing left in the world. "Lily," she whispered. "Where's Lily?" "With Ethan," Jake said. "She rode in the ambulance with him." Nina let out a long breath. "She refused to leave his side," Jake added. "She's scraped up from running, but she's okay." Nina made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "My kids," she murmured. "My God." They walked through the hospital corridors together. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Medical carts rolled past. Somewhere, a monitor beeped steadily. People stared as they passed a nurse in scrubs walking beside a biker in a leather vest. Nina didn't notice. She had already disappeared into the quiet tunnel of a mother heading toward her injured child. Trauma Bay, 2. The curtain was partially open. Ethan lay on the bed beneath harsh, overhead lights. Purple bruises spread across the left side of his face. Black stitches stitched the gash above his eyebrow. His right arm rested in a temporary splint. An IV line ran into the back of his hand. The monitor beside him beeped slowly. Alive, but hurt. Lily sat in a plastic chair beside the bed. Hospital socks covered her bandaged feet. Her small hand held 2 of Ethan's fingers. She looked up when the curtain moved. "Mama." That single word broke something loose in Nina. She crossed the room in 3 steps and dropped to her knees, pulling Lily into a crushing hug. Lily gasped, but laughed at the same time. Nina's other hand reached for Ethan's. She pressed it to her cheek. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, baby." Ethan managed a weak smile. "Not your fault, Mom." His voice sounded thick with pain medication. "He found us." "You couldn't stop him." "I should have tried harder," Nina said. "I should have taken you further away." "Mom," Ethan said softly. "Stop." He glanced at Lily. "She saved me." Nina turned toward the doorway where Jake stood quietly. "You stopped him?" she asked. Jake shook his head. "Your daughter stopped him. She ran into a bar where we were eating breakfast and asked for help. We just answered." Nina studied him for a moment. Then she shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "Don't do that." Jake frowned. "Don't minimize what you did," she continued. Her voice hardened slightly. "I've been asking for help for 3 years. Police, courts, shelters, hotlines." She gestured weakly toward the hospital walls. "Nobody came." "You did." Jake didn't answer. There was nothing he could say that would fix 3 years of failure. So, he gave her the only truth he had. "Travis is in custody," he said. The sheriff arrested him. Nina let out a small laugh. A tired, hollow sound. "He'll make bail." Jake didn't deny it. "He always does," she added. She looked down at Ethan's bruised face. "You saw what he did to a 14-year-old boy," she said quietly. "That's not even the worst of it." Jake leaned slightly against the wall. "What do you mean?" Nina's eyes shifted toward Lily. The little girl sat beside the bed, drawing shapes on a hospital notepad with a crayon a nurse had given her. Children hear everything. They understand more than adults think. "Not here," Nina said softly. "When then?" "Tonight." Jake nodded once. "I'll be here." A few minutes later, Lily padded over to him. Her small hand tugged gently at the front of his vest. The same gesture she had used earlier. "Mr. Jake?" He crouched down so they were eye level. "Yeah, kid. Are we safe now?" Jake looked past her toward the hospital bed. At Ethan's battered face. At Nina, sitting beside him, shoulders tight with exhaustion. At the thin thread of fear still hanging in the room. Some promises were easy. This one wasn't. But Jake Brennan had learned something during 2 tours of war. Sometimes promises weren't about certainty. They were about commitment. He met Lily's eyes. "You are tonight," he said quietly. "And that's where we start." The hospital hallway was quiet by the time the clock passed 9. Most of the daytime traffic had faded. The bright urgency of the emergency room had softened into the slower rhythm of night shifts and distant footsteps. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting long, pale shadows across the linoleum floor. Jake Brennan leaned against the wall near the nurse's station, arms crossed, watching the corridor. Inside the room, Ethan slept. Pain medication had finally dragged him into rest. The bruising across his ribs had darkened into deep shades of purple, but his breathing had steadied. Lily had refused to leave his side. Eventually, she had curled up beside him in the hospital bed, her small bandaged feet tucked beneath the blanket. One arm rested across Ethan's chest like she was guarding him in her sleep. Nina Carter stood in the doorway watching them. She hadn't spoken for several minutes. Finally, she turned toward Jake. "You asked what the worst part was," she said quietly. Jake straightened from the wall. "You said Travis wasn't just violent," he replied. "You said there was more." Nina nodded slowly. "There is." She glanced once toward the room again, making sure the children were asleep. Then she stepped farther into the hallway. "Travis hasn't worked in 2 years," she said. Jake frowned slightly. "But he always had money." "More money than any construction job ever paid," she continued. "Lawyers, bail, new trucks, rental houses." Her arms folded across her chest, and none of it made sense. Jake waited. Nina took a breath. "I found out by accident. One night, Travis had come home drunk. Not the usual angry drunk. A careless drunk. He had left his phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. Nina had never gone through his phone before. Fear kept people cautious. But that night something felt wrong. She remembered the glow of the screen lighting the dark kitchen. Remembered the list of text messages. Names she didn't recognize. Numbers. Locations. Words like delivery, wait, shipment. At first, she thought it was construction work. Then she opened one photo. Clear plastic bags. White crystals. Stacked on a digital scale. "Methamphetamine," Nina said. Her voice carried no emotion now. Just the cold memory of realization. Jake didn't move. "How big?" he asked. "Bigger than I understood at the time." Nina rubbed her arms. He wasn't selling to users. He was moving product. Across counties. She ticked the places off quietly. Flagstaff. Sedona. Prescott. Tucson suppliers bringing it north. Jake let out a slow breath. That kind of distribution wasn't small time. "That explains the bail," he said. "And the lawyers?" Nina replied. "And the way he always knew how to find us." Jake looked at her carefully. "What do you mean?" "Money buys information," Nina said. "Private investigators, people inside offices, people who look the other way." She lowered her voice even further. 3 months ago, he hired a family lawyer. Jake's eyes narrowed. "For custody." The word hung in the air. Nina nodded. "He's filing for Lily." Jake stared at her. "The man who just put your son in the hospital wants custody?" "Yes. And the argument his lawyer is making," Nina continued quietly, "is that I'm unstable, that I move too often, that I expose the kids to dangerous environments." Her eyes lifted to Jake's vest. "Guess what counts as a dangerous environment in family court?" Jake didn't answer. He didn't need to. "He's building a case," Nina said. "He's been building it for months. Anonymous reports. Complaints. A CPS worker showing up at Lily's school." Jake felt a slow tightening in his chest. "Based on what?" "Lies. But investigations still go on record," Nina said. "And every record makes me look worse in court." Jake looked down the hallway. The distant sound of a rolling gurney echoed somewhere in the building. "So the abuse wasn't enough," he said quietly. "He's trying to take your daughter legally." Nina nodded. "He's patient. That's what makes him dangerous." Jake reached into his vest pocket and pulled out his phone. "Then we need someone bigger than county law enforcement." Nina watched him. "Who?" Jake scrolled through his contacts. He stopped at one name. Eddie Reeves. He pressed call. The line rang twice. A man answered. "Reeves? Eddie, it's Jake Brennan." There was a pause. Then a surprised laugh. "Well, I'll be damned," the voice said. "Brennan. Been a while?" "5 years," Jake replied. "I need to ask you something." "Depends how illegal it is," Eddie said dryly. Jake didn't smile. "I've got a meth distribution network operating across 3 counties in northern Arizona." The line went quiet. Finally, Eddie spoke again. "What's the name?" "Travis Holden." Another pause. Longer this time. Jake heard papers shifting on the other end. Then Eddie exhaled slowly. "Jake," he said, "where did you get that name?" "His ex-girlfriend," Jake answered. She lived with him. Knows the operation. And why are you involved in this? Jake glanced through the hospital room window at Lily sleeping beside her brother. At 6 years old, she ran into a bar and asked for help saving her brother's life. She picked me. Silence again. Then Eddie spoke. Travis Holden has been on our radar for 8 months. Jake blinked. What? We suspected he was part of a regional meth network, Eddie continued. But nobody would testify. Everyone was too scared. Jake looked at Nina. She stood motionless, listening. If she can describe the operation, Eddie said slowly, that changes everything. She can. Another pause. Then Eddie's voice hardened with professional focus. Then we need to talk. Jake nodded. When? As soon as possible. Jake hung up. Nina watched him carefully. What did he say? Jake slid the phone back into his vest. He's Dia, and Travis has been under investigation for months. Nina's eyes widened slightly. But they never had a witness, Jake added. He looked directly at her. Until now? Nina glanced back into the hospital room. At Ethan. At Lily. Her daughter's hand still rested across her brother's arm. So what happens next? She asked quietly. Jake considered the question. Outside the hospital windows, the Arizona night had fully settled over Flagstaff. Streetlights cast long pools of orange light across the parking lot. For the first time that day, the fight was no longer just about stopping a beating behind a gas station. Now it was bigger. Much bigger. Jake looked back at Nina. Now, he said quietly, we bring down his empire. Travis Holden walked out of Coconino County Jail 47 hours later. The afternoon sun burned down on the concrete parking lot as the steel doors clanged shut behind him. A deputy handed back his belt and personal belongings in a small plastic tray. Wallet, phone, keys. No remorse, no hesitation. Just the same crooked smile he had worn before the cuffs went on. Across the lot, a black pickup waited with the engine running. Travis slid into the passenger seat. Ray Sutter sat behind the wheel, arms still wrapped in a temporary sling. Thought they might keep you longer, Ray muttered. Travis shrugged. Money talks. He pulled out his phone and checked his messages. 32 unread texts. 3 missed calls from his lawyer. 2 from a number labeled car wash. And 1 message that made his smile widen. Court hearing confirmed. Inside the truck, Ray glanced over nervously. What now? Travis leaned back in the seat. Now we do it the clean way. Meanwhile, 40 miles away in Flagstaff, Nina Carter sat at her kitchen table with a stack of documents spread across the surface. Legal forms. Court notices. Official letters stamped with county seals. Jake Brennan stood across the room, reading one of the pages slowly. His jaw tightened as he reached the bottom. He filed for custody, Jake said quietly. Nina nodded. Emergency custody. Jake looked up. That's aggressive. It's strategic, she replied. She slid another document across the table. Jake read the heading. Child Protective Services. Welfare Investigation. The complaint alleged unstable housing, association with criminal organizations, exposure of children to dangerous individuals. Jake glanced at his vest lying over the back of a chair. Let me guess, he said. I'm the dangerous individual. Nina gave a tired half smile. In family court, optics matter. Truth doesn't always. Ethan sat on the couch nearby, one arm wrapped in a sling, bruises still dark across his ribs. Lily colored quietly on the living room floor, crayons scattered around her. She drew motorcycles. Lots of motorcycles. Jake watched her for a moment before returning to the papers. What judge? He asked. Nina flipped to the final page. Harold Fenton. Jake studied the name. Sheriff Whitmore mentioned him once. Good or bad? Nina hesitated. That depends on who you ask. Later that evening, Jake met Whitmore outside the sheriff's office. The sun had just dipped below the mountains, leaving a deep red line across the horizon. Jake handed him the court notice. Whitmore read it once, then again. Finally, he sighed. Well, the sheriff said, that explains a few things. Jake crossed his arms. Meaning? Whitmore folded the paper. Judge Fenton has a reputation. What kind? The kind that always seems to rule in favor of the side with the better lawyer. Jake waited. Whitmore added quietly, And Travis always has very good lawyers. Jake stared out across the empty street. So the guy beats a 14-year-old half to death, and now he might legally take the sister. Whitmore didn't answer, because the truth was uncomfortable. Family court didn't operate like criminal court. Evidence took time. Investigations moved slowly. And in the meantime, judges made temporary decisions. "How soon is the hearing?" Whitmore asked. Jake checked the document. 3 days. The sheriff shook his head. "That's fast." "Emergency petition," Jake said. "Exactly." Whitmore leaned against his cruiser. "Jake, you need to understand something." "Go ahead." "If Travis convinces that the kids aren't safe, CPS could remove them immediately." Jake's eyes hardened. "Remove them where?" "Temporary foster placement," Whitmore said, "until the court sorts things out." Jake pictured Lily sitting in the hospital bed beside Ethan, her small hand gripping his vest earlier that day, her question echoing in his mind. "Are we safe now?" He looked back at Whitmore. "What are the chances the judge buys Travis's story?" Whitmore didn't hesitate. "Better than you'd like." Across town, Travis Holden sat in the back room of a dimly lit bar. His lawyer spread documents across a table. Custody petitions, affidavits, character statements. "We're framing the narrative carefully," the lawyer explained. "You're a concerned guardian trying to rescue Lily from an unstable environment." Travis smirked. "And the bikers? They help our case." The lawyer tapped the paperwork. "Association with outlaw motorcycle gangs creates doubt about the mother's judgment." Travis leaned back. "So the judge signs off?" The lawyer nodded slowly. "Judge Fenton values stability, and we've made a very strong argument." Travis lifted his glass. Amber whiskey swirled in the light. 3 days, he said. His smile widened. "Then I get the girl." Back in Flagstaff, Jake stood outside Nina's house under the porch light. The desert air had cooled, but tension still hung thick in the quiet street. Inside the house, Lily's laughter drifted through the window as Ethan tried to help her with another drawing. Jake stared down the empty road. He had fought men before. That part was simple. But this fight wasn't fists. It was paperwork, courts, rules. A system that could hand a child back to a monster because the right forms were signed. Jake pulled out his phone. He dialed one number. Eddie Reeves answered. "Brennan." Jake spoke quietly. "We've got a problem." "What kind?" Travis filed for custody. There was a long pause on the line. Then Eddie said one word. "Damn." Jake looked up at the night sky. "So whatever you're building against him," Jake said, "you better build it fast." Inside the house, Lily taped her newest drawing to the refrigerator. It showed a group of motorcycles surrounding a small girl holding her brother's hand. Above them, she had written 3 crooked words in crayon. "The safe people." Jake saw the picture through the kitchen window, and he made a decision. Whatever trap Travis Holden was setting, they were going to break it before it snapped shut. The meeting took place at midnight. Rusty's bar was closed to the public, the lights dimmed low except for the single pool of yellow above the long wooden table in the center of the room. Motorcycles filled the parking lot outside, more than usual. Word had spread. 27 Hell's Angels sat or stood around the table, leather vests creaking softly as men shifted in their chairs. Jake Brennan stood at the head of the table. In front of him lay a map of northern Arizona. Highways. Small towns. Storage facilities circled in black marker. Car wash businesses marked with red X's. Eddie Reeves from the DEA had sent everything he could without making it official yet, which meant they had information, but no warrants. No authority. Not yet. Jake tapped the map with a finger. "Travis moves product north out of Tucson," he said. "Distribution runs through Flagstaff, Prescott, and Sedona." Brick Morrison leaned forward, studying the paper. "How do we know that?" Jake slid a printed photograph across the table. Security camera footage. A white cargo van. License plate partially visible. "DIA surveillance from 2 months ago," Jake said. "Van showed up at 3 different locations in one night." Hector Ruiz nodded slowly. "Distribution run." "Exactly." Tommy Vance leaned back in his chair. "So what's the play?" Jake glanced around the room. "We're not cops," he said. "And we're not trying to be. 1. But Travis is about to weaponize the courts. A few men shifted at that. They all knew what that meant. In 3 days, a judge could decide that Lily Carter belonged with the man who had nearly killed her brother. And once the system moved, it moved slowly. Too slowly. Jake pointed to the map again. If the DEA can tie Travis directly to the operation before that hearing, everything changes. Brick cracked his knuckles. So we find evidence. Jake nodded. Exactly. Across town, Travis Holden sat in the passenger seat of the same black pickup from earlier. The truck idled outside a self-storage facility on the edge of Prescott. Ray Sutter drove. His sling was gone now, replaced with a tight wrap around his wrist. "You sure about this?" Ray asked. Travis lit a cigarette. "Word is DEA has been sniffing around," he said. "Which means it's time to move things." Ray frowned. "Move them where?" Travis smiled. "Somewhere they can't be found before court." Back in Flagstaff, Jake's phone buzzed. A text from Eddie Reeves. "White van confirmed. Tracked near Prescott storage units." Jake showed the message to Brick. "Well," Brick said, "that answers that." Jake grabbed his keys. "Let's move." Engines roared to life outside Rusty's. One by one, motorcycles rolled into the dark Arizona night. Headlights cut through the empty desert highway as the group spread out along the road. Jake rode at the front. Wind tore past his helmet as the speed climbed. The desert at night was a different world. Black sky, cold air, miles of open road. 30 minutes later, they reached Prescott. The storage facility sat alone at the edge of town. Rows of metal doors under weak sodium lights. Jake killed his engine and coasted into the shadows behind a nearby diner. The other bikes followed. 27 engines fell silent. Jake pulled off his helmet. "Tommy," he said quietly. Tommy Vance stepped forward. "The club's best mechanic and tracker. Already on it." He pulled a small pair of binoculars from his saddlebag and scanned the storage yard. After a moment, he lowered them. "White van." Jake's pulse tightened. "Unit number?" 17. Through the chain-link fence, they could see it. A white cargo van parked beside a half-open storage door. 2 men carried heavy plastic containers from inside the unit, loading them into the van. Brick squinted. "Meth?" "Looks like it," Tommy said. Jake stared across the lot. "Evidence. Right there. Enough to destroy Travis in federal court, but only if the DEA got it." Jake pulled out his phone and dialed. Eddie answered immediately. "You seeing this?" Jake asked. "Satellite ping says you're near Prescott," Eddie replied. Jake turned the camera toward the storage unit. 2 men lifted another container. Eddie swore under his breath. "That's it," he said. "That's the stash." "How long do you need for a warrant?" Jake asked. "Hours." Jake looked back toward the van. The containers kept moving. "Eddie," he said quietly. "They're loading it now." There was silence on the line. Then Eddie spoke again. "Jake, if they move that shipment, we lose the whole case." Jake understood. Evidence had to stay exactly where it was until federal agents arrived. Otherwise, Travis could claim it was planted. Or not his. Or gone entirely. Jake hung up the phone and turned to the men behind him. "No one touches anything," he said. "We hold the line." Brick grinned slightly. "Meaning?" Jake nodded toward the storage yard. "Meaning that van doesn't leave." Across the lot, the cargo door slammed shut. The engine turned over. Headlights flickered on. The van began rolling toward the exit gate. Jake stepped forward into the open road. The other bikers followed. 27 motorcycles formed a silent wall across the narrow driveway. The van rolled closer, then stopped. The driver leaned out the window. "What the hell is this?" Jake rested one hand on the handlebars of his bike. "Road closure," he said calmly. "You'll need to wait." The driver looked at the motorcycles, the leather vests, the men who clearly had no intention of moving. Behind him, Ray Sutter stepped out of the van. His eyes widened. "You," he said. Jake recognized him instantly. Ray's face hardened. "You think you can stop this?" Jake didn't raise his voice. "We just did." Miles away, Travis Holden stared at his phone. Ray's call had gone straight to voicemail. Travis frowned. That almost never happened. He tried again. Still nothing. Slowly, realization crept across his face. Someone had interfered. Back in Prescott, Jake watched the van idle in front of the wall of motorcycles. In the distance, faint sirens began to echo across the desert night. Federal sirens. Jake glanced toward the approaching lights. Then back at Ray. "You might want to sit down," Jake said quietly. "Your night just got a lot worse." The sirens grew louder. At first, they were distant, thin echoes bouncing across the desert hills. Then the sound thickened, rolling closer, cutting through the quiet Prescott night. Red and blue lights appeared at the end of the road. Jake Brennan didn't move. The white cargo van idled 20 feet away, its engine rumbling softly. The driver sat stiff behind the wheel. Ray Sutter stood beside the vehicle, eyes flicking between the wall of motorcycles and the approaching lights. 27 bikers remained perfectly still, engines off, boots planted. A barrier that wasn't going anywhere. Ray spat on the pavement. "You think the feds scare me?" he muttered. Jake shrugged slightly. "Not my problem." 3 black SUVs tore into the storage lot moments later, tires crunching across gravel. Doors opened before the vehicles fully stopped. Agents in tactical vests moved quickly, disciplined, controlled. Eddie Reeves stepped out last. He scanned the scene once. Motorcycles across the driveway. The van. The open storage unit. Then he spotted Jake. Eddie shook his head slightly as he walked over. "You always did have dramatic timing," he said. Jake gestured toward the van. "You said you needed the evidence." Eddie glanced at Ray and the driver. "Yeah," he said calmly. "That'll do." 2 agents moved toward the vehicle immediately. "Hands where we can see them," one ordered. The driver raised his hands slowly. Ray hesitated. For half a second, it looked like he might run, but there were nowhere near enough shadows in the lot to hide 27 motorcycles and a federal raid team. Ray lifted his hands. "Easy," he muttered. Within minutes, the van doors were open. Plastic storage containers filled the cargo space. One of the agents cut the seal on the first container. Inside were vacuum-packed bags of clear crystals. The agent glanced at Eddie. "Well," he said, "looks like Christmas." Eddie nodded once. "Bag it." Meanwhile, other agents moved toward the storage unit. Inside were metal shelving racks, stacked with containers identical to those in the van. One agent let out a low whistle. "Jesus." Another counted quickly. 30, 40, 50 containers. Eddie stepped into the unit. He knelt beside one crate and sliced open the plastic with a knife. The same crystals sparkled under the fluorescent light. Methamphetamine. A lot of it. He stood again. "Photograph everything," he ordered. "Chain of custody from this point forward." Outside, Jake leaned against his motorcycle as the operation unfolded. Brick Morrison walked over beside him. "That enough for your DEA friend?" Brick asked. Jake watched agents carrying evidence bags toward the SUVs. "More than enough." Eddie reappeared a few minutes later, pulling off a pair of gloves. "That stash alone ties Holden to interstate distribution," he said. Jake nodded. "What about the money?" Eddie's expression sharpened. "Funny you should ask." He held up a thin folder. "Financial records inside the storage office." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Records? Payment logs," Eddie said. "Shipment schedules. And wire transfers." Jake studied his face. "What kind of transfers?" Eddie flipped open the folder and pointed to a highlighted line. The name jumped out immediately. Harold Fenton. Jake's stomach tightened. "The judge?" Eddie nodded grimly. "Campaign donations routed through shell companies." Brick leaned closer. "You're telling me the judge hearing the custody case is taking money from Travis Holden's operation?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Eddie said. For a moment, none of them spoke. The scale of it settled over the parking lot like desert dust. This wasn't just a drug network anymore. It was corruption. Real corruption. The kind that reached into courtrooms. Jake exhaled slowly. "That changes things." Eddie nodded. "Yeah, it really does." Across the lot, Ray Sutter was being pushed into the back of an SUV. His earlier confidence had disappeared completely. "You can't prove anything," he shouted. "None of this belongs to Travis." Eddie didn't even turn around. "Save it for federal court," he said. An agent approached carrying a sealed evidence bag. 73 pounds confirmed so far, the agent reported. "And counting." Eddie whistled softly. Interstate trafficking at that weight. That's federal prison for a long time. Jake glanced toward the desert highway. What about Travis? Eddie closed the folder. We move on him next. A cold wind swept across the lot. The desert night had turned sharp. Jake pulled on his gloves. Meaning tonight? Eddie shook his head slightly. No. Meaning we do it right. He gestured toward the agents, carefully cataloging evidence. With this much meth, financial records, and witness statements, the warrant will be airtight. Jake understood. Once Travis was arrested with that level of evidence, there would be no bail, no quick release, no more coming back. One of the DEA vehicles started its engine. Evidence bags were loaded carefully into the back. Ray and the driver were already secured inside separate vehicles. The storage unit doors were sealed with bright yellow tape. Eddie walked back over to Jake. You realize what your little roadblock just did? He said. Jake shrugged. Helped you keep your case. Eddie smiled faintly. You helped us collapse an entire regional distribution network. He nodded toward the evidence vans. And exposed a corrupt judge. Jake glanced toward the dark sky. Lily's hearing is in 2 days. Eddie followed his gaze. Then we move fast. The last of the SUVs pulled away from the lot. Evidence secured. Suspects in custody. A crime scene that would soon belong entirely to federal investigators. The motorcycles remained for a moment longer. 27 silhouettes under flickering lights. Jake swung a leg over his bike. Brick started his engine beside him. So, Brick said over the rumble of the Harley, that was the easy part? Jake slid his helmet on. The engine roared to life beneath him. No, he replied. That was just the beginning. Miles away, Travis Holden sat alone in a motel room on the outskirts of Flagstaff. His phone buzzed once, then went silent again. Ray still wasn't answering. Neither was the driver. Travis stared at the screen for a long time. Then he slowly lowered the phone. For the first time in years, something felt wrong. Very wrong. And somewhere out on the highway, 27 motorcycles were already riding back toward town. The knock came just before sunrise. 3 sharp raps on the motel door. Travis Holden woke instantly. He had learned long ago that knocks at odd hours rarely brought good news. The motel room smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap whiskey. The television hummed quietly with a late-night infomercial no one was watching. Travis checked the clock. 5:28 a.m. Ray still hadn't returned his calls. Neither had the driver. That was wrong. Very wrong. The knock came again. Louder this time. Federal agents, open the door. Travis froze. For a moment he considered the window. 2nd floor. Parking lot below. But even as he stepped toward it, the sound of boots moving outside the room told him everything he needed to know. They had already surrounded the place. Slowly, Travis walked to the door. He opened it. DEA agents filled the hallway. Tactical vests. Calm faces. Guns lowered but ready. At the front stood Eddie Reeves. He held up a sheet of paper. Travis Holden, Eddie said evenly, you are under arrest for interstate narcotics trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. Travis stared at him. You're making a mistake. Eddie tilted his head slightly. Funny thing about evidence, he said. It usually disagrees with that statement. 2 agents stepped forward. Cold steel cuffs snapped around Travis's wrists. He didn't resist. He just kept staring at Eddie. You don't have anything on me. Eddie smiled faintly. 73 pounds of methamphetamine says otherwise. Travis's expression flickered, just for a second, but Eddie saw it. And that was enough. By mid-morning, the news had spread across northern Arizona. Federal agents had seized a major methamphetamine distribution hub overnight. 2 suspects were already cooperating. A third, Travis Holden, had been taken into federal custody. The story rolled across local television stations and radio broadcasts like wildfire. At the Coconino County Courthouse, lawyers whispered in hallways. Clerks checked their email twice. And in one office, Judge Harold Fenton quietly canceled a scheduled custody hearing. Jake Brennan heard the news from Sheriff Whitmore. They stood outside the courthouse steps, watching reporters gather across the street. Whitmore folded his arms. Well, the sheriff said, that escalated quickly. Jake watched the cameras set up. What about the judge? Whitmore gave a slow grin. State investigators showed up at his office about 30 minutes ago. Jake raised an eyebrow. Campaign donations from a meth network tend to attract attention. Imagine that, Jake said. Whitmore looked at him carefully. You and your friends created quite the domino effect. Jake shrugged. A 6-year-old started it. Across town, Nina Carter sat in a small courtroom with Ethan and Lily. Their lawyer leaned over the table, speaking quietly. The custody petition has been withdrawn, she said. Nina blinked. Withdrawn? Yes. Why? The lawyer smiled. Because Travis Holden is currently sitting in federal custody facing charges that carry a potential 20-year sentence. Ethan looked up. 20 years? The lawyer nodded. At minimum. Nina sat back in the chair. For 3 years, she had lived with the feeling of being hunted. Every phone call, every unfamiliar car on the street, every knock at the door. Fear had become part of daily life. Now the weight of it began to lift. Slowly, like a storm finally moving off the horizon. The federal trial moved quickly. Drug trafficking cases built on physical evidence rarely lasted long. The storage unit, the shipment logs, financial records linking the money trail, witness testimony from Ray Sutter and the van driver. By the time the case reached the jury, the outcome was already clear. 3 hours later, the jurors returned. Guilty. On every count, Travis Holden stood at the defense table while the judge read the verdict. For the first time since his arrest, the crooked confidence had vanished from his face. The courtroom was silent. Nina sat near the back with Ethan and Lily. Jake stood beside Sheriff Whitmore against the wall. The sentencing came 2 weeks later. 22 years in federal prison. No parole eligibility for most of it. When the judge finished reading the sentence, Travis turned his head. His eyes searched the courtroom. They landed on Nina, then on Lily. For a moment, the same old hatred flickered across his face. But it was weaker now. Small. Contained behind steel doors and concrete walls that would hold him for decades. The marshals led him away. The chains rattled softly as he disappeared through the side door. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun warmed the stone steps. Reporters waited near the sidewalk. Cameras pointed toward the entrance. But Nina ignored them. She stepped into the open air and closed her eyes. For the first time in years, the silence around her felt peaceful. Not tense. Not dangerous. Just quiet. Ethan leaned against the railing beside her, ribs still healing but standing tall. Lily held a folded piece of paper in her hands. She tugged on Jake's vest. Mr. Jake? Jake knelt so they were eye level. What's up, kid? She handed him the drawing. Crayons filled the page with bright colors. Motorcycles. Lots of them. In the middle stood a small girl holding her brother's hand. Above them, Lily had written 3 crooked words. The safe people. Jake studied the drawing. Then he looked back at her. You did good, Lily, he said softly. The little girl smiled. And for the first time since this story began, the danger was finally gone. 6 months later, the road outside Flagstaff filled with motorcycles. They came from every direction, chrome flashing under the desert sun, engines rumbling across miles of open highway, riders from Phoenix, Tucson, Prescott, even Nevada. By mid-morning, the parking lot outside Rusty's bar could barely hold them all. Nearly 800 bikes. Leather vests moved through the crowd. Boots scraped across gravel. The smell of gasoline and grilled food drifted through the warm Arizona air. A banner stretched across the entrance to the bar. Ride for the voiceless. Below it stood Jake Brennan, arms crossed, watching the growing crowd with quiet disbelief. Brick Morrison stepped beside him, holding 2 cups of coffee. One hell of a turnout, Brick said. Jake accepted the cup. Yeah, he replied. Didn't expect this many. Brick nodded toward the long line of motorcycles still rolling down the highway. Word travels. Jake followed his gaze. Word had traveled farther than he expected. The story had spread after the trial, first through local news, then through biker clubs, veterans groups, domestic violence shelters. A 6-year-old girl running barefoot for help had touched something deep in people. People wanted to do something about it. So they did. By noon, the charity ride began. Hundreds of motorcycles roared to life at once. The sound rolled across the valley like distant thunder. Police escorts blocked intersections as the massive line of bikes wound through the highway toward Flagstaff. Drivers pulled over to watch. Some lifted phones to record. Others simply stared. Because it wasn't every day you saw hundreds of bikers riding for children who couldn't protect themselves. At the front of the line rode Jake. Behind him rode Brick. Then Tommy, Hector, Cole, and the rest of the chapter. And in the middle of the formation rode Nina Carter. Her helmet sat slightly crooked on her head, but her posture was strong. Ethan rode behind her on the seat of Brick's bike, ribs fully healed now. Lily sat in front of Jake. Her small hands gripped the handlebars as the wind lifted strands of her hair beneath the helmet. She laughed every time the motorcycles accelerated. Jake glanced down once during the ride. "You okay up there?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. "This is awesome." Jake chuckled. "Yeah," he said. "It kinda is." The ride ended back at Rusty's that afternoon. Tables filled the parking lot. Volunteers grilled burgers and hot dogs. Donation jars lined the bar counter. Every dollar raised would go to shelters and support services for families escaping abuse. By the end of the day, the total sat just above $120,000. Jake stared at the number written across the whiteboard inside the bar. "All this," he said quietly, "from one kid asking for help." Later that evening, the crowd began to thin. Motorcycles pulled away in small groups, engines fading into the desert distance. Nina stood beside the bar entrance watching the last riders leave. "You changed a lot of lives today," she said to Jake. Jake shook his head. "No," he replied. "Your daughter did." Lily ran across the parking lot toward them. She carried another piece of paper. "Mr. Jake," she called. Jake crouched again as she reached him. "You got something else for me?" She nodded. "A new picture." Jake unfolded it carefully. The drawing showed motorcycles again. But this time there were hundreds of them. In the center stood a small girl surrounded by riders. Above them, Lily had written a sentence in bright red crayon. "Heroes ride Harleys." Jake smiled. "I'm framing this one," he said. Years passed. The story faded from the news cycle the way all stories eventually do. But some things stayed. The charity ride became annual. Every summer, more riders came. More money was raised. More families found help. And the little girl who had once run barefoot across a gas station parking lot grew up. On a bright spring morning many years later, the gymnasium at Flagstaff High School filled with applause. Rows of students sat in blue graduation gowns. Parents packed the bleachers. A banner hung above the stage. Class of 2036. At the podium stood a young woman with long blonde hair and steady blue eyes. Lily Carter, valedictorian. She looked out across the crowd. Then she began her speech. "When I was 6 years old," she said, "my brother and I were in trouble." The room grew quiet. "I didn't know what to do, so I ran." She paused. "And I asked strangers for help." Lily smiled slightly. They weren't the kind of strangers most people expect to save the day. Soft laughter rippled through the audience. But they did. She looked toward the back of the gymnasium. Jake Brennan stood near the doors, older now, gray streaking through his hair. He shifted slightly as Lily's eyes found him. "People like to say heroes wear capes," Lily continued. "But that's not always true." Her smile widened. "Sometimes heroes wear leather." The entire room rose to its feet. Applause thundered through the gym. Jake stood quietly in the back, hands in his vest pockets, watching the girl who had once grabbed that vest with bloody fingers. Brick nudged him with an elbow. "Looks like you picked the right kid to help." Jake nodded slowly. "Kid picked us," he said. And in a strange way, that made all the difference. Sometimes, courage starts small. A 6-year-old girl, bare feet on hot pavement, running toward the only people who looked strong enough to help. And because she asked, hundreds of others found their voices too.